where we should be going. I therefore want to commend my colleagues and the office of Harriet for convening us, and more importantly, for anchoring this important national conversation. And I really hope there would be a way in which to make this a signature, national annual meeting. Maybe it should come just before the Katiba discussion, or just immediately after the Katiba discussion, so that we can focus using the lens of the Katiba on how far we have come. The President's decision to establish this office in 2022 was not symbolic. It was a strategic decision. It reaffirmed women's rights and empowerment, not as a peripheral issue, but a central pillar to our nation's socio-economic transformation. And I'm delighted that I had a chance to sit through the discussions and the presentations that came before. We had, and I think, presentations around vulnerability. And I think it is important to remember that the President came to power on the promise of lifting the most vulnerable. Now, this bottom-up agenda is about equity, it's about resilience, it's about bringing us, leaving no one behind. And so the earlier speakers spoke to the enablers for doing this. They spoke to the assets and how women must participate as owners and users of those assets. They spoke to the value of partnerships being bold and intentional. They spoke to the access to justice as a way of protecting and preventing gains. So the value of this gathering cannot be gainsaid. In fact, from an administration's point of view, it comes at a midpoint of this fifth administration, when President Ruto's administration is accelerating the bottom-up economic transformation agenda, which rightly puts women and youth at the core of our growth trajectory. The truth is simple but powerful. No country can prosper sustainably when it excludes more than half of its population. I am not a very good fan of football. I actually don't know how the rules, so that was very exciting up to last week. But I recall once when President Obama was speaking in Kasarani, and he said, if you're a good coach, you build a full, good team. If you do not expect to win, and I know our boys did a very good job of playing one man down twice, but they have to play harder, isn't it? They have to be more determined, in order to come for an extra pass. A good coach feels their best team, their full team. So it is inconceivable that a society could progress with a half of its team down. And that is why the matter of women participation is a matter of development. It's a matter of where society ought to be. In fact, we are told of the best developed societies. You look at two critical indicators, maybe three. One, the status of women. Two, the status of children. Three, the status of the vulnerable, differently enabled members of that society. So this is an indicator of where we are as a society. In doing this, I think it is important that we always remember where we have come from. And that is why it was so good to see Honorable Tia here. It is very important. We honor the women that came before us. Because we take so much for granted. We take so much for granted. They held the light that has navigated the way for us. And on behalf of all the golden girls, I want to express my gratitude. And that also provides for us a standard that those who a duty, then an obligation to give your hand to the next one. And I often say, each person sitting in this room is holding a light that is being used to navigate. Please do not dim the light. Do not dim the light. Hold the light high. And I often say, sometimes you don't know whose path you are lighting. Many times we do not know. Because we speak in that school, you don't know the girls that are watching you. You speak in that rally, you don't know who's watching you and getting inspired. So please keep your light high. They are navigating light for very many young people, young and old, male and female. Today, we celebrate women in every sphere. We are just being told the statistics in our court system. We celebrate, in fact, I remember a lot of mumbling with men saying, you know, that violates the third. And I thought it was quite serious. I'm not sure to tell you here, we had lawyers actually preparing to approach court, you know, to say you cannot let one arm of government, a very important arm of government, be female dominated. You know, at least we passed through that, but it is important to celebrate this. It is important to think intentionally about how to continue growing the quality and professional content of that justice, because it has to be just in being felt, not just in being dispensed. We celebrate our women in parliament. We celebrate our women in the boardrooms and in the grassroots. Beyond, because we know beyond the trailblazers are millions of women in homes, in farms, in the informal sectors that are quietly holding the fabric of our nation together. And I want us to reflect a little bit during COVID. Yeah, during COVID, where women had to now multiply even more. You know, I have this picture of the Women's Day of a woman with 10 hands. I know that you have seen it. And it says, God knew we would not be everywhere. I would say she would not be everywhere. And so she did the woman. You know? So I think it is very, very important to celebrate all these women that are holding the fabric of this nation and of society globally together. In spite of this progress, we know that there are still some significant changes, even as we celebrate. And at this time of global infection, we are witness, and I really want to put a word of caution, we are witness to great efforts to roll back the gains as far as gender equality front is concerned. I want to particularly point to the situation of technological development and the manner in which technology is being deployed in a manner that is very intentional to roll back the equal rights gains. So it is very important to be intentional, not just about the historical factors, not just the legacy issues, but also the new frontiers, the new spaces, and technology is one of those. In fact, it is my intention that our next Athena session will be looking at the impact of tech and how to deploy, how tech is being deployed, and how to manage it, how to interact with it in order to enhance the gains rather than to actually be an affront on the gains that we have. So it is important that really, beyond the legacy issues, and when I talk legacy, I tell people, even if you look in the philanthropic world, in the development world, if I was to express the development space in pictures, when you see the picture of poverty, what picture do you see? A woman. Unemployment, an educated person, migration, refugees. Yes. When you see those pictures, they will be women's pictures. It's very. And so we have legacy issues. But what I'm saying is, as we deal with the legacy issues, must look at their future. What is the future looking like? What is AI looking like? Employment looking like? When you are talking financial wellness, where are we in terms of women and interacting with bonds, for example? Where are we in the cryptocurrency space? So that we do not become the late takers. It cannot be that women are always going to be the late takers. What does it take? What intentionality is required to be at the forefront of these developments that are defining what the future looks like? So for me, I think it is important to look at the entire spectrum. I say, and we have had this, women's empowerment is not just a human rights issue. It's not just a justice issue. It is good business. It is good corporate performance. It is good organizational efficiency. It is good politics. It is good security. It is good law. And it is good justice. It is a healthy society. So this is not just about simple rights issues. It is about the totality of the type of society we must have. And I have to say that society is being challenged in its totality today. So we have to think, how are we going to shape, to curate the empowerment programs as discussed by a number of speakers? From a national security perspective, you know that traditionally this has been seen as the last bastion of women exclusion. In fact, in history, we actually obliterate the history of the contribution of women in security. Oftentimes, when you look in the archives, and when you discover any literature which is talking about the Amazons, you are told it is a myth. That's a myth. So traditionally, and also the way security was conceived, the way security was organized, the way security was deployed, it was seen in masculine terms. And women were to be protected, were to be victims, were to be, nurtured and policed and so forth and so forth. But we know that today, and that is because insecurity was conceived in terms of borders, territorial borders, states fighting states, the armies and things like that. So that is the way threat was conceived. But today, even that conceptualization of threat has diminished. It is transnational, it is soft, it is very, 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 very soft. And if you want to think about it, if you think about cybersecurity today, there cannot be something that is so soft and so insidious at the same time. I keep telling people when I talk to them that you could be sat in your house downstairs and your child, who you think is safe and sound in the house, is being recruited from her cell phone or his cell phone upstairs in your house. This is how insidious it is. So that means the way we develop the skill sets that are required to detect, to deploy, are not the conventional security and understood and organized. So you need to be more nimble. You need softer skills to discover, for example, is a child being molested in the cyberspace? You have the sense of discovering this, of having this, of knowing this. I mean, now, today, with our children, stress has become a very fashionable word. Everybody is stress. When we grew up, stress was not fashion. Isn't it? But today, they even say they're having mental illness. We don't understand that, Do we have the soft side that is going to help us feel the threat, the risks that are upon society, and that if we do not deal with, we are going to have a dysfunctional society, and by extension, unproductive, and by extension, insecure. So it is very important to figure out. The question of gender-based violence, we know, this is not just about the person that is being inflicted. It weakens families, it scars generations. And now we are having a situation where the family unit is under serious affliction. Yes. I was just looking at the statistics in terms of women-headed households. In terms of the level of violence against the girl, the woman, and even the boy child today. So what do we do in terms of just looking at this space of relations, of safe space? You know, one of the most striking things during COVID was when by September 2020, it became apparent that more than 300,000 girl children had fallen pregnant in the home space, supposedly the secure space. These are the things that we have to look to. So who is looking out for those children today? What is the meaning of that in the next 10, 20 years? How are we intervening to restore that stolen childhood? What's going on here? And what is going to be the implication of this in terms of us as a nation? And that was in the beginning in September. And that was part of the reason why we opened our schools quite early. Because we figured out that the girls were safer at school than these are the things that we are going to have to deal with. Economic exclusion drives despair, and in some contexts it fuels radicalization, or so it seems. Climate insecurity. We all know that the vulnerability that is being visited on us in terms of climate change has a direct impact on the ability, not just of the women, but of their families, of societies, and of communities. Conflict. We are back to question. We know that women are disproportionately victimized in situations of insecurity. So how do we make sure that public safety becomes a priority for all of us? We know even when demonstrations happen, the last demonstration, the next thing you had was what? Women were being, you know? So public safety becomes a public good that is a woman's public good. It is extremely important that safety, even as we express our rights, becomes very, very important. And therefore, the way we secure the women, those spaces as they express their rights becomes very, very important. Let's be clear. If women are not secure, communities will not be secure. And without secure communities, our nation cannot be secure, neither can it fulfill its aspiration as a democratic, prosperous nation. Luckily, we have a blueprint. We have a blueprint in the Women's Charter, which is for collective action. And this is why the Office of Harriet is so important, because it offers all of us a national framework for collective action, to expand the opportunities for women, to guarantee inclusion for women, to secure their rights and dignity, and to entrench accountability for all of us that are having the responsibility of power. And it is so important when you talk about inclusion that we are not stuck where the debate on women has been stuck for a very long time. We talk of women in terms of small and medium enterprises, small grants, and small. I think we must scale. We must think scale, because that is the only way to impact change. It's not by little things. So we must scale. We must think big. We must have big visions. And actually, the president has shown us how to act. We cannot be bold on a little minute thing. Yes? So I'm inviting us to be, if you're going to be bold, then we have to really be bold. We have to be bold from the vision. We have to be bold in the commitment. It is almost a leap of faith. It is almost a leap of faith. And that is what I invite us to do. So this charter, the Women's Charter, is not a government policy. It is a promise. It is a covenant with the women of Kenya and the society that is Kenya. It is a promise about what kind of a nation we are determined to become. And I believe all of us really must come here believing in this charter and carrying it, because it is what will provide us with this bold and inclusive vision. So I am very thrilled by the theme of today's meeting, partnership for a bold and inclusive future. You know, somebody told me a story about one of the people that had been incarcerated in Robben Island, in Mandela. And as they sat there wondering whether they would die or not, you know, whether they would ever come out, he kept on saying, when I get out, I'll be a big business person and I'll have banks. And they look at him and say, you're really losing your mind. How are you going to get out of here? You have to have the power to imagine. We must imagine society. And I can tell you that society cannot be without women at the same time. That is really the boldness all of us are inviting us to. So I hope this morning's discussion will not just end as another discussion. And to my fellow colleagues in government, to you in civil society, and I've been there before, to those of us in the private sector, I really want us all, as was called here to us, to recommit again to this idea of intentionality. And it has been spoken in different forms here. Idea of intentionality, idea of scaling up to increase investments in women-led, whether it is peace building, what we are doing, whether it is climate resilience, whether it is business, whether it is farming, and things like that. But also to uphold zero tolerance behavior to violence against women. You know, a friend of mine was talking and had a poem talking about holding the lesson. The lesson. In our mother's period, if there was a woman who had an emergency, the first thing they would do is to run and cover them. Today, what happens? There will be somebody with a and then send it. I think it is very, very, very important to hold the lesson. To hold the lesson to each other, because each one of us needs a lesson. Everybody needs a wrap-up. Let us hold the wrap-up for each other. Above all, it is important that we hold ourselves accountable. Not in words, but in measurable results. To the Office of the Women's Advisor, I commend your vision, areas, and progress, but your success will depend on our collective, all of us, on our collective action. Because the Women's Charter, to succeed, it must become the Kenyan Charter. It must become the Kenyan Charter, adopted and practiced by every Kenyan, because it is good for every Kenyan. We must never forget that insecurity thrives where inequality